Making your first few Dungeons & Dragons characters can be difficult with all of the rules and steps involved, but in this video, which is part 2 of a 4-part series, we'll continue to help you through the character creation process and help you make a truly memorable D&D character. So let's get rolling. Part 1 of the video series covered things like coming up with a character concept, choosing your race and your class, and how to roll your ability scores. And it was a bit of a long video, but with good reason. And that's because those pieces of the puzzle are the things that will serve as the foundation for the rest of the character creation process. And the rest of these videos are actually going to be significantly shorter in comparison, but that first piece that you're coming up with is the truly creative part about making a character. And now the rest of this is going to become more mechanical and more rules-based because everything's going to flow from the decisions you made back in video 1. So in this video, we're going to take a look at filling in more of those details based on the decisions that you made in the last video. In particular, we're going to take a look at your ability scores and where to assign them. You learned how to roll them, but where are they going to go? We're going to take a look at your ability modifiers. They come from the ability scores, but what do they mean and where do I start putting them onto the character sheet? And then we're going to revisit your race and start looking at the different traits and abilities that your race gives your character and where do they go on your character sheet. And lastly, we're going to take a look at how to get your hit points and what are hit points to begin with. So to help illustrate the steps that I'm going to be walking you through in this video, I'm going to use the character concept that I came up with in the last video, which is Doctor Who. Now, Doctor Who is a person from a TV show, and for those of you that don't know, Doctor Who is a wisecracking, intelligent, time-traveling creature who almost lives forever. And so for the D&D setting, this is going to be an elf wizard that I'm creating, and I'm going to walk you through those steps to create the Doctor here. But it's the same process for whatever character concept and whatever class that you are going to pick. It'll all just work out the same. Now, in the previous video, I showed you a couple of ways to get your ability scores, and our first job here will be to assign them now to the various categories: strength, dexterity, con, and so on. So for the purposes of this video, I am going to be using this standard ability score array that's found on page 13 of the player's handbook. And those scores are 15, 14, 13, 12, 10, and 8. And those are the scores that I will be assigning to my Doctor Who Elven Wizard. When determining where those scores should go, the best place to start is really to go into the player's handbook and find the section for your class that you picked. So I'm going to go to the wizard on page 113 of the player's handbook, but all the classes have the same section pretty close to the beginning of them that says creating a, and for me it's a wizard, for you it could be creating a rogue or creating a monk. But look under that section and you're going to see a quick build section. And in there, one of the first things that they're going to say is where you should put your highest ability score. Usually they'll give you 2 or 3 to choose from. For the wizard, it says that first, intelligence should be your highest ability score, followed by constitution or dexterity. So as I go to assign the rest of these ability scores to the various stats, I'm going to be keeping a couple things in mind. The first is the player's handbook under that quick build section, and my wizard says that dexterity and con should be my next 2 highest. So I'm going to keep that in mind, but I also really want you to keep in mind the character concept you're going for. So for me, it's that Doctor Who character, and he is kind of a dexterity, nimble, agile person. And so I am going to put my next highest ability score into dexterity because that makes sense for the wizard and it also makes sense for my character concept. However, when it comes to assigning the constitution score as the 3rd highest as recommended by the player's handbook, I don't agree with. And not that I don't agree with it in terms of what is good for a wizard. I do agree with that. But this is where I'm going to start leaning on the character concept side a little bit more. The Doctor Who character that I'm aiming for is not a heavyweight, doesn't have high endurance that the Constitution would mean if I gave it a high score. In fact, the Doctor is a little bit of the opposite. But what the doctor is good at and would have a high score in is charisma, because his presence in a room is huge. And so instead of placing my third highest score, the 13 in the Constitution, as recommended by the Player's Handbook, I'm going to put it in charisma instead. And the point I'm trying to get to here is that I think this is what you should be doing too. Try to strike a balance between what would make a decent character for whatever class you pick, but also make sure that you're assigning your ability scores in a way that serves the character concept and backstory that you are trying to portray in this character. So now that I've assigned my intelligence, dexterity, and charisma as my top 3 for the Doctor Who character, I'm left with strength, constitution, and wisdom, and I'm also left with 3 scores left, a 12, a 10, and an 8. And at this point, I'm still going to be serving the kind of general purpose of my character concept. Of all those 3, the next that the Doctor is the most proficient in or the best at would be wisdom. So that's going to get the 12 score. Then I'm going to put the constitution as 10. And then as an 8, I'm going to give the strength that score, because A, that's all that's left. And B, the Doctor's really not known for being strong. So we're almost done the ability score section, and we're going to move on to the racial traits. But before that, we're kind of in a middle section where we're going to start looking at your race and how the race will affect your ability scores, because every race has some bonuses to some of these stats, and we're going to have to go now to your race section, find out what they are, and move them over into your ability scores. So at this point, you're going to want to find the race section in your player's handbook. It starts on page 17, and for me, the elf is on 21. And each race has a section called a trait section. So in the elf trait section, the very first thing that I can see is that elves get a +2 to dexterity. So what I'm going to do now is move over to my character sheet, and I'm going to increase the score that I had there by 2. Now, many of the races in Dungeons & Dragons have sub-races, which are just variations of a specific race. So for the elves, there are a couple of sub-races that are available. One of them is the High Elf, and you can read a little bit about them. Another is the Wood Elf, and the other one is the Dark Elf or the Drow. Now, you can take a look and see, and each of them will have their own section for traits as well that are in addition to the general traits that all elves have. So for my Doctor Who character, I will be choosing the High Elf subrace, which means that I get a +1 to my intelligence ability score. And now I'm going to head on over to my character sheet and increase my ability score for intelligence by 1. And with that, we are done assigning and modifying our ability scores for your character. But because we are already in the racial section of the player's handbook, we're going to linger here a little bit longer and start filling out some of the traits that your race is going to provide your character. Now, the process is going to be similar for whatever race you pick, but just to show you what it looks like, I'm going to be walking you through the elvish traits and where all that information goes in your character sheet. Now, after the ability score increase, there's a section for age, and elves go from about 100 as an adult to about 750, and I'm going to flip my character sheet onto the backside at the top, and you'll see a section there for age, and I'm going to say that my Doctor Who character is 400 years old. Now, while you're there, you can see that there's a section for height, weight, skin color, all that kind of jazz. If you take the time to read your racial section for elf or whatever race you choose, it'll tell you a little bit about what the average height and weight and eye color, hair color, skin, all that kind of stuff is for your character. And you could, at this point, go and fill those sections in of your character sheet. The next entry is alignment, and we are going to skip over it for now and deal with it in a future video because there's a lot going on in this section that you need to know about before you choose your character's alignment. Next up is size, but we've already dealt with that a little bit on the backside of your character sheet when we were talking about height, weight, hair color, and all those types of things. So instead we'll move on to speed, which is a measure of how fast or how far your character can walk in one round of gameplay. And for the elf, that is 30 feet, and it goes here in your character sheet. Now, all of the things that we've covered so far are common to all of the different races, and that's the ability score increase, the age, alignment, size, and speed. But anything that comes after this are things that are more unique to that race than any other. You might see some overlap, but these things are different or unique to that race, and therefore they're going to go in a different section. Sometimes these traits come with large descriptions, and it is not a great idea to write them all out word for word into your character sheet. You will just not have enough room. So what I like to do is write the title of the elven trait, so in this case dark vision, and I'm going to put just the key information that I need, in this case 60 feet. But if I need to learn or read more about dark vision, maybe during a game, what I'm going to do to help me out is put in brackets PHB, standing for Player's Handbook, and I'm going to put 23, which is the page I found it on. So if during a game I need to have a quick reference or a quick look at any of the things that I've entered into this character sheet, I know exactly where to find it in the Player's Handbook. So now I'm just going to quickly move through the traits of my elf and put them into the features and traits section with the page number like I mentioned before, and maybe just a few words or notes about what they might mean. Now when we get to the languages section, we are going to put this in a different part of the character sheet, and that is on the left-hand side. So elves are proficient in Common and Elvish, and I will enter these here under the Other Proficiencies and Languages section. And that's the end of the common traits that all elves share. Now, if your race has a sub-race like mine does, the High Elf, you're going to move into that section next and take a look at the traits that are found there and move them into your character sheet. So once you're done adding all of those racial traits and maybe some languages to your character sheet, we're going to move back now to the ability scores section and start dealing with something called ability modifiers. Ability modifiers are numbers that you will add or subtract from all sorts of rolls that you make during the game, and they will either make things easier for you to do or accomplish or harder. And to figure out what modifier you have for each of your ability scores, you're going to turn to page 13 of the Player's Handbook and take a look at the top right-hand side. So as we take a look at my Doctor Who character and see that he has a strength of 8, we can look at the table and see that his modifier is a -1, meaning that he is at disadvantage when it comes to feats of strength. And that -1 is going to go right underneath that 8 right here. For the dexterity of 16, we can see that he gets a +3 modifier, meaning that anything that has to do with dexterity or being nimble or agile, our doctor is going to be at an advantage for this, and the +3 goes here. And we'll just continue on down the list referencing this chart and filling in my ability modifiers. Now these ability modifiers that we've just added to the character sheet are super important because they are the numbers that will be used and carried over into so many other sections of the character sheet and the character creation process. And to give you an example of how ability modifiers are used in the character creation process, and maybe to serve as a bit of a wrap up to this video and a link to the next video where we will be looking at character class traits in depth, we're going to turn to the character class, and in this case wizard, and deal with just the first step in the class traits, and that's determining hit points. Hit points are a measure of how tough your character is and how much of a beating they can take before they die. Hit points are primarily determined by what class you pick. And so for our Doctor Who character, the Wizard, we're going to go to page 113 and take a look at the class features section in order to see what kind of hit points he has. So we can see in the hit points section that our Wizard has hit dice of 1d6 per Wizard level. That's actually fairly low, and it can get as high as a 1d12 for the Barbarian. And so you can see how the Barbarian is going to be a lot tougher than our Wizard character. But we're going to enter this information on our character sheet under the hit dice section, and we're going to put a d6. And because our character is a first level character, his total number of hit dice is 1 because he's only first level, and that will go here under the total. Now underneath that is hit points at first level. And at first level, we always assume that you've rolled the maximum amount of hit points. So for a 1d6, the max would be 6. But here's where we get to see our ability modifiers at play. So at first level, our Wizard gets 6 plus his Constitution modifier. Unfortunately for our Doctor Who character, that modifier is a 0, so it actually stays as 6. and we enter that on the character sheet under the hit point maximum right here. And in our next video, we're going to continue working our way through those class features, as well as take a look at skills, proficiencies, and saving throws. I hope you found part 2 of our character creation video series helpful, and if you did, hit that like button down below for us. And in the comments section, let us know what kind of character you're making and maybe a little bit of the character concept that you're going for. And if you want to learn more about playing or DMing Dungeons & Dragons games or anything else D&D related, then start right now by clicking that subscribe button and the bell down below so that you don't miss a thing. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.